Hayley, when we think about the ocean, we think about what it looks like, and we think it looks blue, we think about the colour, but it isn't always blue. Tell me about ocean colour.
I think we all know something intuitively about the ocean by looking at its colour. Like you say, it's blue, and the colour blue we associate with water. But we might also see other colours, and maybe you'd see brown, and what would you think of that? You'd think, oh, maybe it's mud that's in the water. You might also see the water being slightly green, and you might associate that with plants, like the ones we see on land. And in fact, we have plants, ancient relatives, living in every tiny drop of seawater that we see.
So the colour of the ocean can vary quite a bit. If you gave someone a crayon and asked them to draw the ocean, they would draw it in blue. But actually, that colour can change a lot, because the difference between green and brown and blue is enormous, and that contains information.
Yes, definitely, and it's hard for us to appreciate that when we're sat here looking at it now, but if you go to the satellite perspective and look from the sky, you can see how those patterns of colour change over vast scales, globally in fact.
So when you're looking down from a satellite, you can map out and you can effectively colour in an ocean.
Yeah.
And what sorts of things are the different colours telling you?
Well, they might be telling us things like how much sediment is in the water, or how much life is in the water, which is particularly important for understanding how our wider ecosystems function. You know, how much food there is for fish is dependent on how much basic plant life is in the water.
I love that idea, because the tiny plants in the water you're talking about are too small to see for us here. And yet, if you go all the way up there and you look down, there are so many of them that you can see them from space, which is really cool.
It's quite ironic, really. You'd think you'd be able to see them from here, but actually to get the best perspective on them, we have to go to the skies, to space.
But there's lots of people that collect data on this, and this is information that we can use in society to help do things better.
And it's something that's been known about, in a way, for a long time. Fishermen have been interested in, where all the fish aggregate, where is the best places to go fishing, or if you're growing mussels, where is the best place to grow them? And that's intimately related to the colour of the ocean and how much life is in it.
So in the past, a human might have looked down from a cliff and they'd say, oh, it looks maybe green over there or brown over there, and they could do it on a local scale, but now something different is happening. You can do it on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're wanting to do things like decide which beaches you should be swimming at, you want to know how clean the water is, and you might get that from an idea of how brown the water is, for example, or how green it is. If you want to go diving, you want to be able to see far, so you can see lots of fish and beautiful things underwater, and for that you want the water to be nice and clear. So all of these things are quite useful when you look at the ocean colour. But
we're also looking at a lot of precision here, in that it's not just about, green or brown or blue. There are incredible details, it's like shades of colour, that they have a lot of information, and it's only because satellites are so good that we can see these tiny, tiny differences.
Yes, definitely. And the instruments that are on the satellites are designed to pick up specific parts of colour that we can't pick up with our eyes, for example. They'll be able to differentiate between different shades of green, which can give us numbers to assign to how much life is in a particular patch of ocean.
So this is really about tiny details, shades of blue, shades of green, lots of information.
Yeah, it affects our food. You could tell if there's pollution in the ocean, for example. To a point, it even affects the air we breathe. Those little plant-like organisms produce oxygen. We have to understand how this is potentially changing under things like climate change as well. It's given us a completely different perspective, and it's really only happened in the last sort of 20 or 30 years that we've been able to get this perspective. And there's a challenge for scientists like me now to come up with ways that we can use this data in novel ways to help society.
The colours that the ocean has change regularly. They change quite quickly, right?
Yes, definitely. And you need to have satellites that measure the ocean on a relatively regular basis. And that's what's happening now, is we've moved on from experimental satellites where we're looking at the ocean colour from space for the first time to having pictures coming through every single day.
There's an interesting contrast between us as scientists. I am an ocean physicist, and I study the water at the surface and just below it, and the tiny details of where that water moves and why it moves like that and what's in it and the bubbles. And you look at that same water but from way, way up in the sky, and yet both of those perspectives have something to offer.
They actually, I think, work together maybe more than you might think at first. I mean, although we can get these great global perspectives from satellite data, we need people to go into the water to check what's going on so that we can match up what we're seeing from space with what's there, and also to learn about what's going on further down, because we can't see all the way to the bottom always with the satellite. So
there's lots of things that happen just below the surface of the water that you can't see from satellites, but they will affect the colour of the ocean and other things about the surface, and you can see those things from satellites. So even though from a satellite you can't see beneath the surface, you still get some clues about what's happening down there.
Yeah, I mean, if you see, for example, a big bloom of plant-like life in the surface of the ocean, that's actually going to be food for all the organisms that are living down at depth.
I like the idea of learning from satellite data precisely because I'm interested in what's happening here, but my way of finding out what's happening here is to go in it and look at it. So I'm going to do that, and you can look from the surface and tell me what you can see, and I'm going to tell you what I can see from down below, what the ocean is actually doing right down there. There's lots going on down there. You wouldn't know that from up here, but there's a big rock mound just beneath us, and then all sorts of different fish swimming around it, sea urchins sitting on it, coral growing, all kinds of things.
Great. So this area is a marine reserve. It's been specifically put here to protect this ecosystem and enhance the biodiversity. Can you see the evidence of that down there?
Yeah, there's lots that's alive, and in this area I haven't seen that many fish all in one place. You know, they're big schools, they're very healthy, and they're very varied, and that's important. You know, it's not just one species which has taken over. So you can see, in general, there's a healthy substrate and there's lots that's alive, and it's obviously benefiting from being protected. It's a complete ecosystem.
So what do you think that the effect of having this protected area here would be on areas outside of the marine reserve?
So reefs like this are really important for spawning fish. They're nice protected areas. It's in the shallows here. It's protected from the big wind and the big waves, and so it's a really important place for fish and other organisms to spawn, and it's like a nursery. Even if it's only a small bit here, it's going to have a positive influence on the seas all around it, and just the benefits will spread far more widely.
It's really interesting that you mentioned things like wind and waves. Those are sorts of things we can get information on from satellites, so we could then use that information to decide where best to put these sorts of reserves.
The wind and the waves are something you think of as being very big. They might come from very far away, and yet the impacts they have are on individual fish down here and individual corals and individual sea urchins, and yet the information you can use to protect them comes from something that's way up in the sky, a long way away, but that information is useful.